Our next speaker has kindly given me this umbrella to protect me from the cloud. Daniel G is a super serious internet guy and chief innovation officer at Plarium. He is no longer the chief information security officer, or CISO, at Linktree, nor the head of security at Atlassian, but he tries to stay relevant by hacking AWS. He is protecting me from the clouds as we speak. Please give a warm welcome to Daniel G.
Thank you. One thing that wasn't mentioned is that I'm also a semi-professional Milo enthusiast. This is my personal can of Milo, but if you want a personal can of Milo, you can ask me a question at the end, or you can come to the Plarium booth, and maybe you'll get one. I also run a newsletter called AWS Security Digest, which you should all subscribe to. All right. So what do you think attackers should know about your AWS account? When I ask that question to people, they often say, well, nothing. They shouldn't know anything. The answer should be nothing, but hopefully you'll find out in this presentation that I'll be able to surprise you. I'll be able to teach you about some of the quirks of AWS, and hopefully you'll realize that the answer is not nothing like it should be. All right, so why should you care? Like, if someone can find out some stuff about your AWS account. Well, in traditional hacking, you would have to do some reconnaissance and find out a little bit about your target. You'd have to, scan for IPs, open ports, does it have vulnerable software on it, all that kind of stuff. The same thing applies to the cloud, except you don't need the same kinds of things. You don't necessarily need IP addresses and vulnerable software. You need other kinds of data. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Okay, so about this time last year, Amazon introduced resource policies to DynamoDB. And so you could share DynamoDB tables cross-account. Okay, so if you accidentally expose a DynamoDB table and a hacker comes along and wants to hack it, they need to figure out how to address this thing. How do I point at this DynamoDB table? And so they need to form this ARN. And this ARN has 3 bits of information that they need to figure out, which is the region, the account ID, and the table name in this case. And then if they get those pieces of information and the table is exposed, then they can go read from that table. Amazing. Here's another cool example. So there's a company called Aquasec. They did a bit of research last year. They coined it shadow resources. Okay, so one of these types of shadow resources is this CDK bucket. So AWS CDK, when you first bootstrap it, it creates a bucket for you that looks like this. And eventually, when you run a deploy, it puts all your CloudFormation in that bucket. Then CloudFormation, the service, comes along, runs that CloudFormation, deploys all your stuff, and everything's great. Okay. But what happens if between the time you do the bootstrapping and the time you run the deploy, you delete that bucket? Well, the bucket namespace is global, so anyone can go ahead and claim that bucket. And if they do, then they can put whatever CloudFormation they want in that bucket, and then when you run your deploy, it'll run their CloudFormation. So, okay, you imagine you're an attacker, now you want to run this attack. You need to figure out how to find these buckets. And there's 3 bits of information, There's this weird, random-looking string that you've got at the top, and then you need the account ID and the region. Well, it turns out the random-looking string is just a default, and it's not random at all, and pretty much no one ever changes it. Okay, so it's a static string, right? And so really what you need is the account ID and the region to run this kind of attack. So, turns out that maybe knowing some stuff about an account is important. So how can you get these things, right? These things that you need. So regions, we saw a bunch of identifiers with regions in them. Regions are just a static list. AWS gives us that list. It's like US East 1, US East 2, whatever. Account IDs, they're kind of easy to get, but they're not that interesting, so I'll just go through them quickly. There are heaps of ways, to find people's account IDs. If you want to know more about this, check out this blog post that we've written. It's got all the methods that we found. There's lots more. But this is not the super interesting bit of the talk, so I'm going to kind of skip it. But just trust me that you can find account IDs. And I'll give you one example that I really liked. So it used to be that if you reviewed something on AWS Marketplace, say you used some kind of cloud tool that you bought through the marketplace, and you really liked it, so you wanted to write a review, or you really hated it and you wanted to write a review, if you left a review on the AWS Marketplace, actually you also leaked your account ID in the review. If you just viewed the source of the review, it also included your account ID. Great. So someone could come along and just scrape all the reviews that were ever done on the AWS Marketplace and get everyone's account IDs. Awesome. That's just one. And you can see some screenshots of some other services that do a similar sort of thing. And account IDs aren't meant to be secret. They were never designed that way. But once you start thinking like an attacker, like you saw in the previous two examples, you can't, these are bits of information that you need to actually go do the attack. So it's better if they are secret, but they're not. Okay, the fun part of this talk is when we start trying to enumerate the resources that are in AWS. Okay, so this trick I found in 2016, and it still exists today. You can use it today. You can go jump on your laptop or go home and do it today. So what is it? Well, you can enumerate people's principals using this trick. And a principal is just, in AWS, it's just a user or a role or a group. Okay, so how do you do it? Well, if you attach a resource policy to a resource in your account, not someone else's, you're just doing it in your account, and you give it a valid ARN for that principal, then it'll go through, it'll work just fine. But if you give it an invalid resource, it'll tell you, hey, that resource doesn't exist. You can't do that. Okay. Well, if I'm an attacker, now I've got a way to go and test if resources exist. So the only thing I really need from there is just a good list, right? I need account IDs, which we've gotten in the previous slides, and I just need a really good list of principals that might exist. Well, you could go figure them out yourself. We've done the legwork for you. We publish a list that gets constantly updated. If you like it, you can go download that word list at any time. And we just scraped GitHub, scraped AWS documentation, pulled out all the principal identifiers that might be there, and just put them in a giant list, and then run them across hundreds of thousands of accounts, deleted all the ones that didn't find anything, and you get a beautiful list. Okay, so you can find principals in your account. Okay, you can also find SQS queues. How do you do it? Well, you need 3 bits of information. You need a region, you need an account ID, and you need the name of the queue that you might be finding. And so this works. It's a really easy trick. I mean, trick is a bit much. But what you have to do is run a head request against the SQS endpoint. And if the queue exists and is readable, you get a 200, If it doesn't exist, you get a 404, doesn't exist. And if it does exist, but you can't access it, you get a 403, simple. And so again, what do you need? You need a word list of queues that are commonly used. You can build one yourself if you like. If you've got a particular client or target that you're trying to hack, you can build yours based on that, or you can use ours, which has the most common queues that we could find in GitHub and other places. Okay, so you can find principals, you can find queues, you can also find buckets. So S3 buckets are a little bit different though. SQS queues, you can pretty much bomb that service. With S3 buckets, AWS has recently set up something called active defense, which just makes it a lot harder to really run lots of queries against the service. But you can still do it if you have some tricks. But anyway, the difference here is that the only piece of information that you don't need an account ID, you don't need a region, don't need some of the other things that we've seen, you just need the bucket name that you're testing against, and it'll, same sort of deal, 200 bucket exists and you can access it, 404 it doesn't exist, etc. And you can just sort of run it because it's a global namespace. Great. So how do you find good candidates for what buckets might look like? Well, there's heaps of ways. You could just use dictionary words because they're all taken. All the small dictionary words like domains, they've all been taken. So you could do that. You could also use domains because when people host their website on an S3 bucket, typically the bucket is named the same thing as the domain. So I have a personal website, danielgrzelak.com. My bucket is called danielgrzelak.com. Great, okay. Well, so now all you need is a list of millions of domains to try to see if they have buckets that exist like that. Great. But because the way that S3 works is when you access an S3 bucket, there's a DNS resolution that happens. Okay, so there's a DNS query, and there's all these companies that are just scooping up all of our DNS queries from all over the internet and publishing that data or making that data available to people who want to pay for that data. And if you do, you can just get a lot of those DNS queries in bucket names. And then one other example I'll give you is website references. You jump on a website, you look at the JavaScript, you look at what kind of assets it's referencing. It'll probably tell you a whole bunch of S3 buckets that it's using. And so now all you need is a bunch of websites that you just scrape and parse the JavaScript from. Easy. OK. But those shadow resources, the ones that you wanted to hack that belong to a specific account, actually, CDK isn't the only service that automatically creates a bucket for you. There are heaps of AWS services that do this for you, and there are also open source tools that do this. And so we've made a tool that has a word list that looks like this, and you could, when you run it against something, you just replace the things in square brackets, and away you go. There you go. So you can find S3 buckets, queues, and principles. All right, mentions. We're going totally the other direction now. Okay, mentions are a little bit different to enumerating an account. Think of mentions as like overhearing someone at the water cooler saying something naughty. You've heard it. You might not know what it's about, but you've heard it, so it's cool. So you can tuck it away somewhere. And people put references to AWS resources all over the place on the internet. They put them in presentations, they put them in code, they put them in notes and configuration files and weird images that they post on social media, etc. So if you can be bothered, you can scrape all that stuff and find all those identifiers and then put them in a database somewhere. Okay, I'll give you a quick few examples of how you can do this. So GitHub has this events API, which is a stream of amongst other things, all of the commits to public open source repositories. Okay? So it's just like a boatload of data all the time. So you're probably not going to be able to scrape it, right? And you're going to get rate limited if you try. And I've tried, I know it happens. But luckily, there's this website called GH-archive, which archives daily all of the commits in that stream. So you can just download the daily stream and then go download all the commits and parse them and regex them and all of that kind of stuff for AWS resources. Fine, you'll find a whole bunch. If you don't want to do that, you can actually just live query. I mean, you can use the GitHub search API, or you can use SourceGraph, which I've done here, to search sort of open source repositories for ARNs and other identifiers. And then finally, one other place which is really fruitful is package registries. So each language has a place where you can put libraries that you can then reference in your code. Luckily, most of those registries also publish some kind of feed. So in this case, Python and PyPy publishes an RSS feed, which has a list of all the new libraries that are being put in, and also the updates to libraries. So if you get that list, just download them as they come in, and then regex them for AWS identifiers or other things. If you like other, doesn't relate to this talk, but you can also find passwords and all sorts of other fun things if you do that. Okay, another way you can do this kind of stuff is, and I'm not sure if I'm using oracles in the right way here, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Anyway, I think of an oracle as something that tells you the answer if you just ask nicely for the answer. And there's a bunch of oracles in AWS, both ones that they sort of intentionally give you as part of the API, and ones that whoops, we did that thing, and now it just works like that. Okay. The first one is exactly one of these. We didn't mean to do this, but it kind of just happened. And so if you have a public S3 bucket, you can actually identify the account ID that that public S3 bucket belongs to. You're like, how do you do that, Daniel? Okay. Well, it turns out that AWS policies have a special condition called resource account. And what that condition says is, allow me access if the resource I'm trying to access is in a specific account. Okay. Also, that condition allows wildcards, and it can attach to the client session. So I can start a session that says, only allow me to read this public bucket if the account ID it's in starts with 1. If it doesn't start with 1, it starts with 2, 3, 4. Okay, maybe it starts with 4 and it gives me access. Now I know it starts with 4, so I start 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and so on. And eventually you can enumerate the entire account ID for that public S3 bucket. Great. So if you've got a list of S3 buckets, now you can generate all of the account IDs they belong to, and you can get a whole bunch of other account IDs that you now have from S3 buckets. Awesome. I'm sure that sounds painful and tedious to do by hand, so I wouldn't ask any of you to do that. I've written a tool called Conditional Love that you can download. It's an open source tool, and it'll do this enumeration for you. But even better than that, it doesn't do just account IDs, because there are other conditions that AWS allows you to put in policies. For example, org IDs, so you can enumerate other people's organization IDs if they have a public bucket. But one that's probably going to surprise you even more is that if you know the name of a tag of a public S3 bucket, like say owner or some other common tag name, you can enumerate the value of that tag using this method, because there's a resource tag condition that you can use. All right, there's also the intentional oracles. So this is an API that says, hey, give me all of the EC2 images that people have published intentionally that are public that anyone can use. Okay, if you run this API call, what you get is this kind of JSON output. And as you can see there's an owner ID, which tells you the account ID it belongs to. So it's not exactly the way that we want it, right? Like, we want to be able to say, hey, for this account, tell me all the resources. But this is kind of saying, there's a bunch of resources that have account IDs associated with them, so it's kind of backwards. But you can run this query every day, put it all in a database, and then maybe one day, when you need to know something about a given account, you just query the database rather than run the call. Okay, can anyone tell me, how do you pronounce this word that's up there? Have a go. No, not you. What was that? Aussie. That's correct. I was hoping someone would say AWS I, and then I would chastise them for being wrong. But it is Aussie. I know this because I created it, and I named it Aussie. So that's what it is. And it's the grand finale of the talk. And it's a free tool that any of you can go ahead and use. Just go to awseye.com. You can plug in any account ID there, and hopefully, if I do this right, I'll be able to do a demo for you. I can't find my cursor. Can anyone see my cursor? Oh, there it is. Okay. So you can just enter an account ID in there. But if you don't want to enter your account ID because you're scared for whatever reason, that's fine. You can just click Surprise Me, and it'll try and look for one of the accounts that are already in the database. And so you can see here, these are all the principals, all the roles that it's found. But if it's found any other resources in that account, it'll also show them. And you can see, like, there's a bunch of service accounts there for, like, ECS and guard duty and SSM and whatever. So we know this account is using all of those services. And I'll just go back to show you one more thing that's kind of interesting. So remember, we talked about accounts are really easy to get. There's almost 400,000 accounts in the database now. It's almost 3.5 million resources that we know about that exist. And there's over 48 million mentions that have been, like, out there on the internet. So that's it for me. And I'll just put the slide back up so you can submit feedback. But thank you for listening to my talk.